Hi, I'm Eldrick Stoneskin, and the video essay that you're about to watch is part 4 in a series containing my theory surrounding the secret of the Winterfell crypts, and ultimately the key to defending humanity against the coming onslaught of the others. As we know, the ancient magic the last hero gained from the children of the forest was humanity's key to ending the long night. But exactly what this magic was has been left as a deliberate mystery through the series so far. But after seeing all the resurrected Stone Starks in Part 1, the resurrected Stone Knights Watch in Part 2, and the resurrected Stone Heroes of Part 3, I believe the children of the forest sacrificed and resurrected these ancient warriors using the Weirwoods to store their spirits temporarily while their bodies were turned to stone with Greyscale before slipping back to their stone corpses, creating a brotherhood of undead stone warriors who rose again harder and stronger, invulnerable to harm and the cruel effects of winter, who could withstand the heat of a flaming sword and could be preserved as statues for eternity beneath the earth. And in my opinion, the first men were then gifted a magical horn from the children, so it may be sounded when the others return, recalling the spirits from the trees, turning the trees to warriors, and waking these giants in the earth once more. But could the children have been capable of this magic? Could they have resurrected this first night's watch and turned them into stone men? To answer this, let's take a look at a few major points. Every Long Night hero parallel character we've seen shows us resurrection symbolism and either symbolically or literally being made of stone. We have ancient stone kings of winter hidden behind a collapsed wall in the crypts, who might have been the previous Long Night heroes, heavily foreshadowed to rise again. We have an unknown magic the Long Night hero received from the children that was essential in winning the war for the dawn. And we have a magical disease that turns people to stone. So maybe the children turn this Long Night hero to stone with a magical stone disease, so they could be preserved as statues for 8,000 years, which is very plausible, as the probable source of a magic stone disease would likely come from the children of the forest, who are said to worship gods of forest, stream, and stone. In addition to the fact that the children worship gods of stone, it also turns out that the children of the forest might have access to stone magic as well, as we hear Catelyn tell us during her recollection of the story of during God's grief and the construction of Storm's End, that the children helped him build it, shaping the stones with magic, potentially hinting at some type of stone-based magic or power. In fact, the children are so tied to stone magic that it turns out the trees the children worship, the Weirwoods, never die, they just turn to stone, showing us the magic of the old gods being able to turn once living things into stone. Just as we think the kings beneath the Weirwoods never died, they just turned to stone as well. We even see evidence that the children of the forest worshipped stone figures beneath a hollow hill in the Rainwood, in this quote from the Ariane 2 sample chapter from the Winds of Winter. And all at once she found herself in another cave, 5 times as big as the last one, surrounded by a forest of stone columns. Damon Sand moved to her side and raised his torch. Look at how that stone's been shaped, those columns in the wall there, see them? Faces, said Ariane, so many sad eyes staring. This place belonged to the children of the forest. Not only showing us more stone worship around the children of the forest and the magic of the old gods, but also reinforces the idea that the children could shape stone, with Damon remarking that the stone was shaped, not carved. Another interesting fact we hear from Leaf is that Greenseer and Skin Changer spirits can enter both trees and stone, which are the two things associated with our theory: spirits residing in trees, which turn to stone, and spirits slipping back into their stone bodies. This also explains why the stone columns beneath the Rainwood in our previous quote were given faces, so a greenseer within the stone could see out of its eyes. So after seeing that the children of the forest follow gods of stone, potentially have magic that can shape stone, worshipped trees that turned to stone, shaped and worshipped idols of stone beneath the earth, and can skin change into stone, it's very likely that the magical stone disease we see waking around our next Long Night hero's resurrection could have come from the gods of forest, stream, and stone we know the children worship. To further this connection, we hear from Val in A Dance with Dragons that woods witches, who are strongly associated with or might be descended from the children of the forest, know the truth about Greyscale, hinting at this stone disease having an association or origin with the children of the forest. It also happens that Greyscale is said to thrive in cold, damp places. Places like the north, where the last hero sought out the children, and places like the Wall, where we see the next Long Night hero set to be resurrected. It also seems that water magic is involved with the origins of Greyscale as well, which is something we'll discuss more in Part 5, where we investigate the Shrouded Lord, the Stone Men, and the Sorrows. But for now, just remember that the children's gods are gods of forest, stream or water, and stone. We also hear that Bran and Mira nickname one of the children in Bloodraven's cave Scales, which could hint at the idea that some of the children themselves have scaly stone-like skin too, possibly having a dormant version of Greyscale, much like Shireen's. Because after all, we hear that Greyscale is not always mortal in children, in a possible example of George's clever wordplay. So it seems very possible that the children of the forest could have access through their stone gods to a magical stone disease that they cleverly used to help the last hero and his companions protect and preserve themselves and become heroes of the first long night. And if a green seer or skin changer's spirit can slip into stone, as is said by Leaf, then they could certainly re-enter their Greyscale transformed bodies and rise again, harder and stronger. And the benefit of the spirit leaving the body and slipping into the weirwood while your corpse turns to stone from Greyscale would be that the onset of this disease would not drive you insane, as it does with the stone men we see losing their minds in the Sorrows, creating undead stone warriors reborn from the trees who are completely sound of mind. But could the children have raised these dead warriors from their weirwoods, as all the symbolism so far suggests? Well, it appears that the children do have a close association with the dead, as we hear from Geo Mormont in A Clash of Kings that the children of the forest could speak to the dead, it's said. Another interesting thing to note is that after Bran calls out to his father in his first Weirwood vision during A Dance with Dragons, we hear Leaf warn Bran upon returning to his body not to try and call him back from death, which would be an unnecessary warning if the powers of the old gods weren't capable of such feats. And to further this idea of the children being able to raise the dead, George gives us an amazing example in the world of Ice and Fire, when we hear of a woods witch, a possible descendant of or closely associated with the children, who claims she has the ability to raise an army of the dead, further suggesting that the power of the old gods not only has the ability to raise individuals as Leaf suggests, but complete armies of dead warriors. In addition to this, we also hear an amazing story about the children's magic mentioned by Asha Greyjoy in her Wayward Bride chapter from A Dance with Dragons. When she mentions a tale she remembers hearing about the greenseers of the children turning the trees to warriors, possibly hinting at the powers of the old gods being able to raise dead warriors from the spirits within the trees, just like our stone army foreshadowed to slip from the trees back to their stone bodies and awaken from the crypts beneath Winterfell. We also hear from Jojen that the Greenseers are said to know truths forgotten now in Winterfell, and knowing they're able to see into the ancient past, maybe this truth George is referencing here is the knowledge of a forgotten army of stone warriors stored beneath Winterfell. To further this, Jojen even mentions that the Greenseers can see the truth that lies beneath the world, which could also be a reference to our Stark army beneath the ground, But by far the most amazing and widely known magic of the children of the forest is the ability to wake giants in the earth, which is exactly what we are investigating here. Stone giants foreshadowed to wake from beneath the earth. In fact, rather amazingly, the three-eyed crow actually shows Bran a stone giant in his fly or die dream, when we hear of a giant in armour made of stone appearing in this dream sent by the old gods, further connecting the powers of the old gods to resurrected giants made of stone. And while I know this symbolically represents Gregor Clegane, I think this works on two levels, and George is using Gregor as a clever way of further foreshadowing the Starks as resurrected stone giants as well. Now, it's very interesting that Gregor Clegane is constantly referred to as a giant symbolically made of stone, as I think George is using him to foreshadow our stone Stark giants. As we read through the books, we get lines such as, "Sir Gregor Clegane's face might have been hewn from rock," and "his face looked as hard as if it had been cut from stone." He's also described as though he was chiselled out of rock, and said to have a voice like stone breaking. And interestingly, after this stone giant dies after his battle with Oberyn Martell, he is resurrected as Sir Robert Strong, which is interesting as the German word for strong is Stark, essentially giving us the name Robb Stark, giving a resurrected stone giant the same name as one of our main King of Winter characters. We also know that Gregor's sigil is that of 3 dogs, which is very reminiscent of the direwolves of House Stark and their sigil. And Gregor is even said to fight with a 2-handed greatsword, as any man would use a normal sword, reminding us of the ancestral Stark sword Ice, and its larger than normal size. And amazingly, in A Game of Thrones, while Catelyn is observing Robb Stark, our modern King of Winter character, we get this interesting line. "It was dark among the trees, where the moon did not reach. When Robb turned his head to look at her, she could see only black inside his visor," which is the exact same language used by George in Bran's vision of the giant in armour made of stone, who opened his visor and there was nothing inside but darkness and thick black blood. Comparing this resurrected giant in stone armour meant to represent Gregor Clegane, or Robert Strong, to our King of Winter character, Robb Stark, yet again. And the fact this stone giant appeared in a vision sent by the old gods only furthers the idea of resurrected Stark giants with armour made of stone being associated with the magic of the old gods. So it seems the children of the forest, who worship gods of stone, potentially have magic that can shape stone, worship trees that turn to stone, carved idols of stone beneath the earth, and sent Bran visions of stone giants, might have had access to stone magic as well, turning the first Long Night heroes to stone with Greyscale, and resurrecting them through the Weirwoods, turning the trees to warriors and raising an army of the dead. And I think the creation of these stone giants that became the first Night's Watch so they could defeat the others and wake from beneath the earth upon their return was the magic that the children provided to win the War for the Dawn. And if we look to a traditional northern song we hear at the harvest feast in Winterfell during a Clash of Kings, it seems George might be telling us that this was indeed the case. As we know, the only memories from ancient times would be passed down orally, just as they are in the real world, through songs and stories. And it just so happens that we actually learn of what seems like a traditional northern song that reenacts the War for the Dawn through both song and performance. And if we pay close attention, George shows us something very subtle and very interesting. The music grew wilder, the drummers joined in, and Hothor Umber brought forth a huge curved war horn, banded in silver. When the singer reached the part in the night that ended, where the Night's Watch rode forth to meet the others in the battle for the dawn, he blew a blast that set all the dogs to barking. 2 Glover men began a spinning skirl on bladder and wood harp. Morzumba was the first on his feet. As you've just heard in this seemingly traditional northern song called The Night That Ended, we see a huge horn is sounded at the exact moment the first night's watch rode forth and met the others in the battle for the dawn, which is interesting as we think the first night's watch became stone giants beneath the earth, and having what seems like an important and ceremonial horn specifically blown only at this exact moment in the performance of this historical song tells me that this horn might be as much a part of the story of ending the long night as the Night's Watch themselves. And what does George show us at this crucial moment a special horn is blown during the War for the Dawn? Morzumba, a northern symbolic giant in broken chains, is the first on his feet, cleverly showing us a giant rising from containment when a horn is sounded at the battle for the dawn. Which is interesting because we know of a horn that wakes giants in the earth. Waking giants in the earth is a power that the children are said to have, and the children were crucial in winning the War for the Dawn, suggesting to me that this horn could possibly represent a magical gift from the children of the forest that humanity could use to wake these giants in the earth once more, thousands of years in the future. So maybe the Horn of Winter was a gift from the children that wakes the giant kings of winter, foreshadowed to rise as a weapon from beneath the earth to defeat the others. And to see if this is the case, let's take a look at the Horn of Winter itself to see if we can find any connections to the kings of winter. The first thing to note about the probable Horn of Winter that Ghost leads John to at the Fist of the First Men is that the horn itself is described as broken, giving us more broken symbolism yet again. Just like the last hero's weapon was broken, the Kings of Winter's sword Ice was broken, and Azor Ahai's sword was broken as well, connecting the Horn of Winter with Lightbringer and foreshadowing this horn as a weapon against the others, just as Lightbringer is. And amazingly, Winterfell itself, which is shown to us as a giant stone man as discussed in Part 1, is also described as broken as well, hinting that the castle of Winterfell, or rather the giant stone men beneath it, are also a weapon against the others. And paired with the fact that the horn was buried alongside Dragonglass, a weapon against the others, and left for Jon, our next Azor Ahai, to find, only further suggests it as a weapon against the others as well. Another connection between the Horn of Winter and our Kings of Winter are the runes George shows us carved into the false Horn of Winter that Melisandre burns, reminding us of the runes on the crowns of the ancient Kings of Winter and the runes worn on the skin by the ancient ancestors of our last hero parallel character, Waymar Royce. Another point I'd like to make that connects the Horn of Winter to the Kings of Winter is that the person most obsessed with finding this magical horn is just as obsessed with finding the crypts of Winterfell too. That being Mance Rayder, who after living up to his name and sneaking into Winterfell as Abel in A Dance with Dragons, has been continuously searching for the entrance to the crypts after previously searching for the Horn of Winter, potentially furthering the idea that Mance Rayder, who has the same title of King Beyond the Wall as the last person to blow the horn, could have some knowledge that lends to the idea that the horn and the crypts in fact do work in conjunction with each other. The other thing we hear the Horn of Winter supposedly does is bring down the wall, which doesn't line up with the idea we've heard repeated often that it wakes giants in the earth. It also seems that this isn't the case because we've heard from several people through the books that the legend says the horn has been blown previously by Joramun, but the wall still stands undamaged today, and there are no tales we hear of it ever having been brought down. But what if it doesn't bring down the wall, but another wall instead? What if it instead brings down the collapsed wall in the Winterfell crypts, a wall George has deliberately drawn attention to in the deepest part of the most mysterious area in A Song of Ice and Fire? The same wall we speculate was collapsed deliberately to conceal these giants beneath the earth, the first kings of winter who are foreshadowed to rise, in my opinion, from the sounding of the Horn of Winter. Furthering this research around the Horn of Winter, it turns out we do find out a bit more information regarding the giants that are said to rise when the Horn of Winter is blown, through Jon's recollection of Old Nan's stories while seeing giants for the first time beyond the wall. In Old Nan's stories, giants were outsized men who lived in colossal castles, fought with huge swords, and walked about in boots a boy could hide in. These were something else, more bear-like than human. As you've just heard, the giants that Jon describes from Old Nan's tales aren't what we think of giants in current times. The giants Jon recalls from Old Nan's stories actually sound more like the kings of winter, who we think were outsized men with a huge ancestral sword in ice who, if I'm right, are living beneath a colossal castle to this day. Jon then connects his memory of giants with the sounding of the Horn of Winter, thinking that when the horn is blown, Jon would expect to find giant men rising from beneath the earth, more like our kings of winter than the giants beyond the wall in this quote. And Joramun blew the Horn of Winter and woke giants from the earth. He looked for great swords 10 feet long, but saw only clubs. Most were just the limbs of dead trees, some still trailing shattered branches. A few had stone balls lashed to the ends to make colossal mauls. The song never says if the horn can put them back to sleep. Telling me that the giants Jon remembers foretold to wake in northern songs and stories have large swords, live in colossal castles, and wake when the Horn of Winter is blown. And these giants could very well be our sleeping giant stone kings beneath Winterfell, the heroes of the first long night. And it just so happens that the idea of kings and heroes sleeping beneath the earth, awaiting to be awoken to save their people in their time of need, often by the sounding of a horn, is a common and reoccurring trope in real-world mythology, and I think influenced George to create his version of this trope, creating the ultimate endgame weapon against the others, the Stone Kings sleeping beneath Winterfell. Here is a short description taken from Wikipedia describing the common real-world mythological trope commonly referred to as the King Under the Mountain or the Sleeping Hero trope. King in the Mountain stories involve legendary heroes, often accompanied by armed retainers, sleeping in remote dwellings, including caves on high mountaintops, remote islands, or supernatural worlds. The hero is frequently a historical figure of some military consequence in the history of the nation where the mountain is located, and the story often goes that the king sleeps in the mountain, awaiting a summons to arise with his knights and defend the nation in a time of deadly peril. And some real-world examples of this mythological trope of a king asleep under the mountain share some very strong parallels to our stone kings asleep in the unlevelled hills of Winterfell, and have very clearly influenced George to create his version of this trope. And please forgive my pronunciation with some of these names. Our first example is Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, who is said to have been turned into marble and thus became known as the Marble King, who is said to be hidden somewhere underground. Some say behind the walled-up Golden Gate of Constantinople, until his glorious return as the immortal emperor, which is said to be signalled by the appearance of a bright star in the sky, reminding us of the comet we see in A Song of Ice and Fire that is said to signal the coming of Azor Ahai. The person we expect became a stone king so he may rise again to defend his people. We also have Fionn McCool from Celtic mythology, who is said to be a giant in some stories, and is said to sleep in a cave or mountain surrounded by the Fianna, a group of warriors often designated as a type of Kingsguard. It is also told that a day will come when the Dord Fiann, a mystical hunting horn, is sounded 3 times and Fionn and the Fianna will rise up again. Our next example is Harry Hotspur, who was said to have been hunting in the Cheviots when he and his hounds got holed up in the Hen Hole, or Hell Hole, and are awaiting the sound of a hunting horn to awaken them from their slumber. And a big shout out to YouTube commenter Abby S for this example. We also find this trope in the tale of King David in the cave, in which we find King David sleeping alongside his warriors deep inside a cave, waiting for the blast of the shofar, an ancient horn, that will awaken them from their millennia of slumber and arouse them to redeem Israel. Our next example is probably the most well-known in the story of King Arthur, who, according to legend, was taken away to Avalon to sleep until he was needed by the people of Britain. Several legends talk of a herdsman who stumbles across a cave on mainland Britain wherein he finds Arthur sleeping, often with his knights and Excalibur, his legendary sword, by his side. We also have Saint Wenceslas of Bohemia, now known as the Czech Republic, who is said to sleep in the Blanik Mountain with a huge army of Czech knights and will emerge to protect his country at its worst time, riding on his white horse and wielding the legendary hero Brunhild's sword. We have Ogier the Dane, who in Danish legend is said to dwell in Kronborg Castle, where his beard has grown down to the floor. He will sleep there until some day when the country of Denmark is in its greatest peril, at which time he will awaken to save the nation. Another example is Frederick Barbarossa, a Holy Roman Emperor who is the subject of many legends, including that of a Kjofhauser legend that says he is not dead but asleep with his knights in a cave in the Kjofhauser Mountains, and that when the ravens cease to fly around the mountain, he will awaken to save the empire and restore Germany to its ancient greatness. There is also an enduring legend of a cavern full of knights in armour asleep at Alderley Edge, who in some versions reside with King Arthur, awaiting a call to decide the fate of a great battle for England. There is also a wizard involved, who is referred to as Merlin in later versions of the legend. And speaking of Merlin, an obvious Greyscale parallel character, his story also follows the sleeping hero trope too, as in some tales, he was imprisoned in an old oak tree by the Lady of the Lake. Other stories say that he was tricked into hiding in a cave near Cornwall, and it's said that he is still there to this day. We also have Thomas the Rhymer, who is said to be found under a hill with a retinue of knights in a tale from the Anglo-Scottish border. The story goes that Thomas fell under the Queen of Elfland's spell and followed her deep within the hollows of the Eidolon Hills to the fairy otherworld. Some say Thomas became immortal and still lives, gathering horses for the sleeping knights that rest with him deep within the hollow hills. And last but not least is Charlemagne, who is said to be living inside Mount Untersberg with his knights. The story goes that the emperor will eventually awaken, take on his armour and ride out with his knights and rescue Germany in a great battle. So as you can see, the idea of an ancient undead warrior king sleeping beneath the earth with his eternal army, awaiting the call to rise again to save his people from a great threat, often being called upon by the sounding of a magical horn, is very prevalent in real-world mythology. And in my opinion, George has taken this ancient mythological trope and made it real, having giant kings turn to stone, resting beneath the earth preserved as statues, awaiting the horn that wakes the sleepers so they may rise again to save humanity from the great threat of the long night. But if this is the case, we should expect George to show us symbolic stone giants rising up from beneath the earth throughout his writing to foreshadow the coming of these giant stone warriors. And it turns out George uses amazing environmental descriptions to show us just this. And as we are about to see, they are all specifically located at ancient magical defensive locations of the First Men. Our first and most obvious example of foreshadowing that there are giants residing beneath Westeros happens to be the place we find the Horn of Winter, and is shown to us as a literal giant stone fist, punching up through the ground as if a stone giant is rising from beneath the earth. The hill jutted above the dense tangle of forest, rising solitary and sudden, its windswept heights visible from miles off. The wildlings called it the Fist of the First Men, rangers said. It did look like a fist, Jon Snow thought, punching up through earth and wood, its bare brown slopes knuckled with stone. As you've just heard, George describes this giant stone fist as rising up suddenly from a forest, as if a stone giant is punching up through the earth as he rises from the trees. And interestingly, we see all this language repeated again by George from Chet's point of view in the prologue from A Storm of Swords, where it says, Chet could see the fist punching its way up through the green, giving us another example of stone giants rising from the trees yet again. Also note that the forest we've seen this giant stone hand rising up from happens to be called the Haunted Forest, bringing to mind the Weirwoods, the spirits that reside within them, and the stone giants we suspect to rise from beneath them. And amazingly, as we've said, this also happens to be the place where Ghost leads Jon through this haunted forest to the location of the Horn of Winter. And by no coincidence, on the way to find this horn we think can turn the trees to warriors, we find more trees presented as warriors in this quote. The trees stood beneath him, warriors armoured in bark and leaf, deployed in their silent ranks, awaiting the command to storm the hill, which I think is foreshadowing of the giant stone kings living in the trees, awaiting the command to rise again. And to further this connection to the Stone Kings of Winter, we also find Jon describing the stone ring wall at the summit of the Fist of the First Men as being a stone crown, symbolically implying a giant king beneath the ground. And George repeats this language again from Chet's point of view as well, with Chet describing the old stone ring wall that surrounds the summit as the hill's crown yet again. And interestingly this time, the crown is presented to us as a fiery crown, with torches lit in a great circle atop this stone crown, reminding us of Azor Ahai and the fiery crown Stannis wears upon taking the Azor Ahai title. And amazingly, we even see this defensive stone structure presented as anthropomorphized stone men through Jon's description of the ring wall. The views atop the hill were bracing, yet it was the ring wall that drew Jon's eye. The weathered grey stones with their white patches of lichen, their beards of green moss. It was said that the Fist had been a ring fort of the first men in the Dawn Age, an old place, and strong, Thorin Smallwood said. So it seems George is using the Fist of the First Men to show us evidence that giant stone warriors might be secretly present beneath the earth, ready to punch up through the earth as they rise. But this isn't the first example of stone giants at an ancient First Man location that we've seen. As we saw in part 1, that Winterfell is also presented to us as a giant stone man too, with both Catelyn and Jon describing Winterfell as having scalding waters rushing through its walls and chambers, like blood through a man's body. But we don't only see symbolic stone giants rising up at the Fist of the First Men and at Winterfell. George also shows us this at another castle, and this castle is also said to be built by Bran the Builder as well. And that castle is Storm's End, an ancient First Man defensive structure imbued with ancient magic, and amazingly is said to be built by the same person who constructed the Winterfell crypts, the place we find stone giants foreshadowed to rise from. And amazingly, Catelyn anthropomorphizes this giant stone castle in this quote from A Clash of Kings. Of towers there was but one, a colossal drum tower, windowless where it faced the sea, so large that it was granary and barracks and feast hall and lord's dwelling all in one, crowned by massive battlements that made it look from afar like a spiked fist atop an upthrust arm. Amazingly showing us another stone giant punching up through the earth and rising from beneath an ancient First Man defensive location, just as we saw at the Fist of the First Men and we expect to happen at Winterfell. In addition to this, we see George further hint at a giant stone being living beneath Storm's End, with more amazing symbolic language from Davos's perspective. While on his approach to the landing beneath Storm's End with Melisandre, Davos describes seeing a half-seen finger of rock come rushing up out of the gloom, giving us another stone hand reaching up from beneath the surface. And interestingly, we even hear Davos describe the landing beneath Storm's End that he enters with Melisandre as a mouth yawning in the cliff, symbolically showing Davos as entering the belly of some giant stone being that also happens to be yawning, presenting this giant stone being as waking. All in all, Storm's End shows us another example of a giant stone being residing beneath an ancient First Man defensive location, just like the Fist of the First Men and Winterfell, which in my eyes is meant to foreshadow our stone giants beneath Winterfell that we expect to rise up again from beneath the ground in defence of man. Another interesting observation to make is that if George is hinting at giants beneath the earth, he has chosen some very interesting names for locations around the map which might further this idea, as it seems George might be anthropomorphizing Westeros itself to foreshadow a giant entity beneath its surface. With George giving the land itself anthropomorphic features such as a neck, an arm, a fist, some fingers, and a singular eye, which is very interesting as it seems George is showing Westeros itself as a living being with one singular eye, just like the other Azor Ahai characters we've seen, like Jon, Beric, Bloodraven, and Waymar Royce. And if Azor Ahai and these giant stone heroes of the last long night are sleeping underneath Westeros, then anthropomorphizing the land itself is a very clever way of suggesting and foreshadowing stone giants rising from beneath Westeros. But there's one more ancient First Man location that shows us a giant king beneath the ground, and we happen to find an anthropomorphized stone king here as well. And we find it at a place now referred to as Oldstones, an ancient seat of the First Men, so old that the original name of the castle has been forgotten to time. And amazingly, the stone ruins of the curtain wall are described by George as looking like a crown on a king's head, therefore implying a giant king underneath the earth yet again. We even hear that this castle was a hall of kings in the ancient past, and we even find evidence of spirits of dead kings in this location as well. As it's said in Jenny's song, "High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghosts." This is also the place we meet Lady Stoneheart for the first time, a parallel character to the Weirwood woman who we think sacrificed our first kings to the Weirwoods, creating undead tree warriors. To further this, we again see trees referred to as dead warriors at Oldstones when we hear that fallen leaves lay thick upon the ground, like soldiers after some great slaughter, in the prologue of A Feast for Crows. This also happens to be the place where Robb Stark speaks with Catelyn about naming Jon Snow, our new Azor Ahai, the King in the North. We also see evidence of runes at this location, marked on the hammer of King Christopher IV, linking this Stone King with our Stone Kings beneath Winterfell, as we've already seen runes on the crown of the Kings of Winter, the magical armour of House Royce we suggest these kings wore, and the Horn of Winter, which we suggest woke Stone Kings. And amazingly, this anthropomorphized Stone King is known as the Hammer of Justice, which is very interesting as this title sounds remarkably like the Hammer of the Waters, which woke giants in the earth. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. As you can see, it's very likely that the Horn of Winter does in fact wake giants in the earth, and in my opinion, these Grey Kings are sat beneath the surface waiting for the magical horn to announce their coming. Once again, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone out there for supporting the channel. I've learned a lot through your comments and have really enjoyed the discussion around this theory and the series as a whole. If you haven't yet and you enjoyed the video, please like, leave a comment and subscribe if you haven't already, as I'm now researching a follow-up series to this one due to the channel's success. And as always, I'd love to discuss your thoughts, ideas, or additional evidence around this theory in the comments below. In part 5, we're going to go back into the ancient past to try and discover who Azor Ahai, the person I think was the male progenitor of House Stark, and the man who became a statue beneath the surface really was. As it seems George is hinting at this ancient king as being a proto-Stark, through the large amount of parallels both this ancient hero and Ned Stark share. The Starks and this ancient king are both known to have grey eyes and grey skin. Both Ned Stark and this ancient king married mermaids. Their halls are both rumoured to have been warmed by dragon fire. They both worshipped Weirwoods. They both go down beneath the surface while turning grey to sit a throne when they die. And if my theory is correct, they were both blessed with stone, so they could rise again, harder and stronger. If you think you know who I'm talking about, let me know in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.